Malak Hifni Nasif, Bahithat Al Badiyah, Seeker of the Desert, in relation to Egyptian feminist discourse. So the following is an overview of the whole presentation, and as some background, I will start off with the biography of Malak Hifni Nasif, focusing on her education, from which I will move on to talk about the Nahda, its historical context of feminist discourse in Egypt. I will then mention the literary contributions of Malak Hifni Nasif and discuss them, which focus greatly on marriage and veiling, and these two matters will also be discussed in much detail. I will then talk about Nasif's political activity and its impact on Egyptian society, and I will finish off with a letter from May Ziada and talk about the legacy and contemporary relevance of Malak Hifni Nasif's work. So Malak Hifni Nasif was born into a society in transition where traditional roles were being questioned, and educated in an environment influenced by both local traditions and modern ideas. She emerged as a writer deeply committed to social reform. So having said this, the following provides a brief summary of Malak's background and education. So Nasif unfortunately lived a short life between the years of 1886 and 1918, and was both born and died in Cairo, Egypt. And she had a highly educated father who was greatly involved in the education sector and was a lawyer, whilst Malak's mother took great interest in public affairs. Malak in her free time often read Arabic poetry and began to write herself. She was one of the first Egyptian females to graduate from a state school in Egypt in 1901, after which she attended the Sania Teacher Training College, graduating in 1903. And she then went on to teach at the Sania school for 2 years, but was unfortunately forced to quit her teaching career after getting married to her husband in 1907, as during that period it was actually against the law for a woman to be both married and teach at the same time. Nevertheless, she still remained involved through convincing the families of her friends and relatives to send their daughters to school. So the Nahda, it was also known as the Arab Renaissance or Awakening, and was a cultural movement that emerged in Egypt in the early 20th century, and was a period that marked a significant era of cultural, intellectual and political change. And the emergence of the Arab world from the age of decline, which was influenced by the Arab world comparing itself to Europe, was amongst one of the reasons that led to the Nahda. And the introduction of the printing press was just as significant, as it enabled access to books and therefore sparked people's interest towards different ideas such as education. So during the period of the Nahda, women began to question their roles in society, and as the country navigated the pressures of colonialism, along with modernization and emergent nationalist movements, feminist voices began to emerge. And women during that period started being active as writers and publishers. There were many women's magazines, and the topic of women, as well as topics that concerned women, such as veiling, education and marriage, were being discussed in the press. And scholars such as Moala argue that this period laid the groundwork for feminist discourse by challenging traditional norms and advocating for women's rights. And this dynamic context is quite essential for understanding how writers like Malak Hifni Nasif could articulate a feminist vision rooted in local realities, which we will explore further on. Now, literary contributions and influences. So Malak began her career as a writer by publishing her work in Al-Jarida, the leading newspaper of the Ummah Party, and she frequently addressed audiences at universities and at the Ummah Party headquarters. So along with this, Malak Hifni Nasif's literary contributions include essays, short stories, and novels that engage directly with themes of gender inequality, identity, and social injustice. And she explored these themes in her writings, particularly on issues like veiling, marriage, and education. Now, in 1909, she released An-Nisayat, a compilation of her speeches and essays, which she used as a platform to advocate for women's advancement, whilst challenging the traditional narratives imposed on women and highlighting the everyday struggles of female emancipation. So in one of her seminal works, Nasif critiqued the limited roles available to women and argued that their full participation in social and economic life. She argued for those matters. So at that time, the prevailing feminist perspective typically linked women's progress with the adoption of Western norms and a shift towards a more European style society. Now, Nasif's personal journey, marked by struggles against entrenched patriarchal norms, provided her with a unique voice in the emerging feminist movement, and her narrative style combined personal relation with a broader critique of societal norms, echoing the ideas of contemporaries such as Mahmoud, who emphasised the power of literature in social transformation. Now, marriage. As previously mentioned, marriage was one of the topics that started concerning women during the Nahda, and which Nasif often wrote about in her works. So it was, in fact, her own personal experience that was the main driver for her to write extensively about the marital rights of women in Egypt, and that was her husband's polygamy, which she did not approve of. So in her essays titled Orko Wives, she labelled polygamy as wife's mortal enemy. And Nasif advocated for significant marital reforms, such as the abolition of polygamy, mutual rights for men and women to initiate divorce, and raising the minimum age of marriage to at least 16 years old, where she noted that early marriage could lead to health issues, such as hysteria in women. So in one of her works, she wrote, وقد ثبت التجربة أن أكثر اللاتي يتزوجن صغيرات جدا يصبن بأمراض الأعصاب الهستيريا. And not only was she advocating for women's rights, but also their well-being here. So central to her proposals was the belief that love should be the foundation of marriage, whilst opposing unions based solely on economic benefit. Now, unveiling. So many Arab feminists, including men, saw unveiling as a symbol of women's liberation, and this was one of the ways in which Nasif differed, in fact, from other female figures in the Nahda. So unveiling had become a ritual commitment for many activists in Egypt, such as Huda Sha'rawi, who promoted the practice of unveiling, viewing it as a symbol of not only liberation but also progress for women. Malak, however, was more concerned about the seclusion of women from society rather than veiling, and while Malak shared some common ground with Sha'rawi's contemporaries, she also developed her own distinct views. So Nasif observed that the male-dominated British colonial government, in addition to most of the men in the Egyptian liberal movement, were pushing women Muslim in Egypt to discard their veils. And she also pointed out that the project of unveiling was in fact being used as an ideological cover for British colonialism in Egypt. And Malak therefore argued that feminists in the Muslim world should be skeptical of any group of men who were trying to control what women did with their bodies, whether that control was used to make them wear the veils or not wear them. So rather than fully embracing the notion that westernization alone could liberate women, she argued for a combination of Western ideas with Islamic principles and traditional values. Now, Malak believed that only by merging these elements could true progress for women be achieved. And in addition to this, she also noted that women abandoning the veil would bring shame to them and would result in evil for their nation and religion. So instead of lifting the veil, focus should be on educating women and raising them in the correct upbringing, and that the morals of all should be reformed for the benefit of the whole nation. And this was noted in one of her works when she said, فنساء مصر متعودات الحجاب فلو أمرهن مرة واحدة بخلعه وترك البرقع رأيت ما يجلبنه على أنفسهن من الخزع. ورأيي أن الوقت لم يأن لرفع الحجاب، فعلموا المرأة تعليما حقا وربوها تربية صحيحة وهذبوا النشأ وأصلحوا أخلاقهم بحيث يصير مجموع الأمة مهذبا، ثم ارتكوا لها شأنها تختار ما يوافق مصلحتها ومصلحة الأمة. And also, as noted by Al-Gharawi, Nasif's writings reflect a nuanced understanding of both cultural heritage and the need for progressive change. So Nasif argues that true liberation requires not only political rights, but also economic independence and educational opportunities. So as Al-Khatib notes, Nasif's writing is revolutionary because it situates women's struggles within the broader framework of national and social progress. And her bold critique of patriarchal traditions pushed for reforms that would allow women to redefine their roles within the family and society. And now this perspective resonates with later feminist theorists who stress the importance of economic and legal rights for achieving gender equality. And also comparative studies, such as those conducted by Awad, reveal that her ideas provide a theoretical foundation for grassroots initiatives aimed at expanding women's rights. And these initiatives, which focus on improving access to education and legal reforms, are direct extensions of Nasif's call for empowerment. And such examples underscore the patriarchal relevance of her literary contributions in shaping not only cultural debates, but also public policy. So amongst the many ways in which Nasif was politically active, one aspect of her political activity was the connection with women from other countries. So she founded a Union of the Education of Women, which brought Egyptian women together with other Arab and European women, and she later founded an emergency health service based on the Red Cross and a nursing school for women in her own house. And a significant political action she took was her presentation of a 10-point program for the improvement of women in the Egyptian Legislative Assembly in 1911. And she laid out 5 points as to how education should be improved. That it should have religious orientation, should be required up to primary school, should include hygiene, child-rearing, first aid and economics, and it should include training for women in nursing and teaching professions. But that it should also be open to all women for higher studies. And she asked for legislation on all these points. And the other 5 points focused on other women's rights such as marriage, age and unveiling. Now through this program, unfortunately, it was ignored by the Assembly, but it was a major example of women taking charge of feminism in a political forum. Now, another woman who greatly took charge of feminism during the Nahda was May Ziada. She was a prominent Lebanese Palestinian writer and poet who deeply admired Nasif's courage in addressing women's issues within the context of national and social progress. And in one of Ziada's letters, she likened Nasif's pain towards her misery and misguidance of humanity to a sacred fire within her that encouraged her to work towards the cause of empowering women through her writings. And so that was done when she said, أتمنى لك العذاب المعنوي لأنه النار المقدس. And she also hoped for Nasif التحمس لإجراء الإصلاحات اللازمة وتنفيذ المبادئ الطيبة والنهوض بالاجتماع نهضة تهتز لها القلوب حمية وتربا. أتمنى لك ذلك ولولا لما وجدنا في كتابتك تلك لأن العميقة التي تنبه الفكر وتلمس العاطفة في آن واحد. Now, Nasif's pioneering feminist ideas significantly influenced May Ziada's literary work and advocacy for women's rights. So she wrote essays on Nasif's life and works in Al-Muqtataf, which were later compiled under a book titled Bahithat Al Badiyah, a critical study. And in her book Bahithat Al Badiyah, Ziada paid tribute to Nasif by compiling and analysing her works, and thereby amplifying Nasif's voice and ensuring her contributions were recognised in feminist discourse. She brought attention to Nasif's critiques of patriarchal traditions and her advocacy for women's education and empowerment. And Ziada then reinforced these themes in her own writings, furthering the cause of gender equality in the region. And in one of her letters, she highlights that women's power is increasing when she writes, النساء تتوالى متكاثرة متمكنة مع مرور الأيام. And she later on in the letter expresses her hope for the future and encourages women to not remain silent when she writes: مستقبلنا صالح لأن حاضرنا مملئ بالآمال الطيبات. فارفعي صوتك يا سيدتي ولا تيأسي، قولي بصراحتك واكتبي بشجاعتك، جاهري ولا تصمتي. So Ziada's letters not only honour Nasif's legacy but also highlights the solidarity and mutual support amongst women intellectuals striving for gender equality in the early 20th century of the Arab world. And Wahid Muhammad Awad Muafi writes, this was the first book written in Arabic by an Arab woman on an Arab woman. So as a conclusion, Malak Hifni Nasif's work has had a lasting impact on social, cultural debates in Egypt, and her bold critiques and insightful analysis provide intellectual foundations for later feminist movements, include influence in both public discourse and policy. And for instance, as highlighted by Haddad, her work has been cited in discussions about legal reforms and the expansion of educational opportunities for men. And her legacy can be seen in the work of later feminist authors and activists who continue to challenge gender inequality in Egypt and across the region. And while Nasif's work has been celebrated for its pioneering insights, it has not been without controversy. So conservative critiques argued that her challenges to traditional norms threatened the social fabric of Egyptian society. On the other hand, some modern feminists have critiqued her work for not fully addressing intersectional issues such as class and regional disparities. However, as noted by Dabbar, these debates continue to enrich feminist discourse in Egypt by highlighting the evolving nature of gender politics. And such discussions are quite essential for understanding the dynamic interplay between literature and social change. And this is the references I used for the presentation. Thank you.